Thank you all for coming here tonight. I want to thank Bob Nelson for inviting me to do this talk on behalf of the Apostle Island Historic Preservation Conservancy. I want to thank Trisha Miller for hosting us tonight on behalf of the Bayfield Heritage Association. I also want to thank Mike Wiggins for inviting me to do this talk at the Madeline Island Museum last year, and Jeannie Peterson at the Washburn Heritage Association for inviting me to put together the talk the first time, about February of last year. And especially want to thank Norma Sulier, who is sadly no longer with us. She was the Bad River librarian for many, many years. And when I did AmeriCorps at Bad River back in 2008, she introduced me to a lot of the ideas, history, and documents that I'll be talking about tonight. So I want to thank her especially for passing on the knowledge and allowing me an opportunity to pass on the knowledge as well. So thank you everybody for being here. Let's see here. So a little bit about myself. My name is Amorin Mello. I was born and raised in Bayfield County. I moved away as quickly as I could and eventually found my way back. Came back around 2008 when I was working for Bad River, and I would go to these language tables, so Ojibwe-Moan language tables, and I would hear different oral histories about Bad River, about the reservation boundaries being larger before than they are now, and about stolen treaty lands that were in the Pinocchio Mountains. And I thought this was really fascinating history back in 2008, so I put it away in the back of my mind for a later date. About 2 or 3 years later, Gogebic taconite came to the area and brought awareness and attention to the iron deposits that are in the Pinocchio Mountains. I was like, oh, this sounds familiar. Isn't that the same company that the Bad River elders were telling me about? And I found out that there's a paper trail that corresponds to the tribal treaty allotment that line the iron deposit of the Pinocchio Mountains outside of the Bad River Reservation. So I was able to find that paper trail, start making maps of them, create maps, and go out in the wilderness and go hike all these places that were in general land office records from the 1850s. And I was able to find old mine sites, ghost towns, waterfalls, and trails, and it's just a fun hobby to have. So around 2015, I joined the Swamigan History blog and started doing more history just as a hobby, as a way to get things out of my head and out to the world. And around 2017, I started working for the Radcliffe Band. So this little hobby I had turned into a career somehow. Don't ask me how, because I'm still trying to figure it out. But so before I get much deeper into tonight's talk, I want to talk about 2 key phrases that people may not be familiar with, and it's helpful if I get them out ahead of time. First phrase I want to talk about is paper towns, and that's referring to land speculation that was happening back in the 1850s, not just here, but nationwide, as people were moving into the new frontier. They were mapping out towns with streets and alleys and avenues, blocks and lots, piers and docks, public squares, creating towns on paper saying it's going to be here. And they plop down a paper town somewhere. Maybe people would show up, maybe they wouldn't. But there's a great book about it, about the boom and bust of the first paper towns in LaPointe County. And that's this book called The Future City on the Inland Sea, A History of Imaginative Geographies of Lake Superior by Dr. Eric Omenson from UW-Madison. It first came out when I moved to the area, and it really got me hooked on local history. It's more than just the type of history that you would read from descendants of the second wave immigrants, the people that came here for logging, for railroads, steamboats, and whatnot. They're kind of the second wave of immigrants. They're not really the first wave that came earlier, about 3 decades earlier in the 1850s. The other main phrase I want to get out of the way right away is called mixed bloods. And today we might think of this as a derogative term. It's not in this context. It was a specific legal phrase that was used in the treaty language to give unique privileges and rights to a specific class of people that were not quite white and they were not quite Indian. They were somewhere in the middle, and they are much more derogative terms that could be used. I'm not going to get into that. I'm just trying to say that mixed blood, when I say it, it's actually a legal phrase back in the day, a specific terminology. Today, we don't really say mixed bloods anymore. We just say that someone is tribal. We don't really get into the blood quantum of someone. And I highly recommend both of these books. This book, the first one, features City on the Inland Sea, inspired me to get into local history. This other book is actually based on the map that I did of the Pinocchio allotment. It got published in Indian Country News, and Professor Larry Nesper from UW-Madison saw this map, knew about the minor proposal in the news, and said, whoa, what's this all about? So we got together, and I shared ideas and my research with him, and he was able to bring it to a new level by publishing the book to expand on what it meant to be a mixed blood and what it meant to have an allotment, and how they got dispossessed by the mining companies and created the LaPointe Iron Company that we have today. So I highly recommend both of them. If you haven't read them yet, please do. So paper towns of LaPointe County. The ones that we're most familiar with would be Bayfield, for example. LaPointe doesn't really count as a paper town because it was here before the whole paper town concept was formed, before America was a concept, the United States of America. LaPointe was here before the British were trading here, and they were even here before the French first came into the area, 1600. So LaPointe does not count as a paper town. Bayfield counts as a paper town because it was platted, mapped out during the 1850s after the 1854 treaty, and it survived the Civil War. It's the only paper town up in LaPointe County to survive the Civil War. Ashland was also formed 1854, but they were squatting on Indian land at the time, and it got abandoned during the 1860s. So it kept the name when it got revived as the logging era came in, as the railroad era came in during later decades, 1870s and 1880s. But it was technically abandoned for a while, so it doesn't really count as being here since the 1850s. And Washburn like to say that it didn't form until 1883, after the railroad had already arrived, after the people were already there. But if you look at the original land records, like we will do tonight, we'll find out that it's actually been there for at least 30 years. 30 years before Washburn said it was there, pre-Washburn. So that technically makes it older than Bayfield. And that may be part of the rivalry between Bayfield and Washburn today. This map here, you can see there's a paper town called New Holland, more or less where Pike River would be, was the old town of Salmo. That's an example of a paper town that failed in the area. There's all kinds of paper towns throughout LaPointe County, what's now the tri-county area of LaPointe, Iron County, Ashland County, and Bayfield County. And I won't get into many of them tonight. There's way too many to mention during this hour-long talk. But the main one people think about would be Bayfield, Ashland, Washburn. Bayfield survived, Ashland came back to life, and Washburn just got reinvented. The reason why people were coming to Washburn was kind of a thing called the Great Trail. And Schoolcraft, Henry Rowe Schoolcraft writes about it during his various journals from expeditions and doing business in the frontier country here. And he draws this map where you can see there's this linear point from Sioux River going straight across the Barren, down across the Great Divide to Wild Rice country, which would be Sioux River or Mississippi River country. It's a little bit more complicated than that. It's not just one linear trail or one trail at all. It's actually a complex network of many different parallel trails branching and interconnecting with each other, and many multiple trailheads, pretty much from any mouth of a creek along Flemington Bay. You would find a trail that would go up to the backbone of the Bayfield Peninsula, the high and dry country, and then you'd be able to follow this backbone of the high and dry country across the Great Divide from the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway watershed that would flow to the Atlantic. Instead of going that way, you can cross the Great Divide and you can start going towards the St. Croix River, Mississippi River, down to the Gulf of Mexico and beyond. So it's a legendary major portage of 150 miles from Bayfield all the way down to St. Croix Falls. people say portage. They weren't literally carrying their canoes. They were most likely having a canoe stashed on one end of the trail and another canoe stashed on the other end of the trail. But you read a lot of journals where they talk about this portage. And yeah, it's a little long for that. And the complex trail network had multiple branches that would get you from this trailhead to another trailhead. One that we'll talk about tonight is called the Council Trail, or Talking Fish Trail. And on this map, the Talking Fish River seems to follow what would be called Thompson Creek today, that comes out to the west end of Washburn. Around the time of the treaty, it was being called Vanderventure Creek. And Vanderventure is a fellow that we'll talk about a lot more later on. But we still call that part of Washburn Vanderventure Bay today. The creek is no longer named after him. Apparently it got renamed after a lumber baron, but his name is still prominent in the area. And at the mouth of the creek, there was once a large village, an Indian village, where the people would have council grounds to meet, to tribes would come from all over the region to meet at what we call West End Park today. It's a very important place, a very legendary place for a long time. On this other map, we have the same river name, Talking Fish River, but it's a little bit further south. It's not up at Washburn anymore. It's now coming down to what we call Fish River today, or Fish Creek. And so the name Talking Fish is actually a combination of Fish Creek and then the Talking Trail that would get you from Fish Creek to the council grounds at Washburn. This summary about it is from the 1840s, 1940s to late 1930s, during the New Deal, when the United States government had something called the Work Progress Administration to promote cultural projects as a way to get out of the Great Depression. And part of that project was to interview Bad River elders to capture the oral tradition from people who were still alive during the 1850s that were elders at the time, 100 years later. And they captured the name of the place called the Talking Trail that would go from Fish Creek to the popular meeting or camping site, which we now call West End Park. Still a very popular meeting and camping place today. It's just one of those natural places where that will happen for a long, long time. The trail that I was talking about, it didn't just happen randomly as a straight line that would go from Bayfield to St. Croix Falls, 150 miles long. It's actually following this very unique ecological landscape called the glacial sands of Lake Superior. And it's the sand deposit, very deep, very long, 150 miles long. It's just only a few miles wide. So it's very distinct landscape. Not only is it easy to follow, it's also high and dry. So you're not trying to cross rivers or creeks that will get your feet wet, or the swamps or anything like that. It's very easy to travel. And not only is it easy to travel, but there's all kinds of other people that are traveling it too. So you're going to meet your friends and family along the way. You're going to stop at different places to see people, or maybe go pick berries at this time of year at this location, or pick wild rice at this other time of year at this other location. Hunting, gathering, socializing. There's a lot of these different reasons why people travel this trail for thousands of years. Ever since the glaciers went away 10,000 years ago, people have been traveling this area for that long. And so, like I said, it's a legendary connection between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. And as you travel from point A to point B over and over and over again, people are going to figure out, how do I make this easier next time? So naturally, you're going to find different shortcuts from point A to point B, or places that you like to stop because they're convenient, or you know the people there, or you really like the food there. Today we have GIS technology that can kind of do the same analysis. How do I make this the easiest route? the academics from the UW Milwaukee have done topographical analysis where they find out, okay, if you're leaving La Pointe and you're trying to get to the Barrens and go further southwest, is it easier to go up the Sioux River or is it easier to go up the Pike River? They're both kind of easier than other options, but they figured out that Sioux River is actually a little bit easier because of the topographical changes, because of the landscape. There's less up and down that you would have to take to get to the meeting place, which is right behind Mount Valhalla. Um, uh, so that's another reason why Washburn was a little bit more popular than the Bayfield area was back in the day. So where do trails go from here? Well, if you look at the original town of Washburn boundaries, they were a lot bigger back then than they are today. Town of Washburn was more than just a city. It was went up to pretty much to Salmo, just south of Pike Creek. Go way over into the Barrens, to the headwaters of Sand River and whatnot. That would be like what is now town of Bell today. Go down pretty much to the border of the city of Iron River, upper Pike Lake Chain area, to the south side of what is now Highway 2. Go over, it would include Benoit and Muckwa and pretty much town of Eileen to the border of Ashland. Go back up to Fifth Creek and all the way up again. So Washburn was a lot bigger back in the day. And you can see there's 4 main hubs that were on this map. This is a bicycle road map, but it's really a map of the old trails that people turn into bicycle roads. And there's 4 main intersections, 4 main hubs that you could go to. You can go to Sioux River, and that would be easy to follow trails going up north to Bayfield, Red Cliff, La Pointe, the South Shore, and beyond. Or if you wanted to go east, you could go down to Fish River and head over to Ashland and take these other trails to take you to Bad River, to Montreal River, to the Black River, Presque Isle River, Porcupine Mountains, Keweenaw Peninsula, Sault Ste. Marie, and beyond. If you wanted to go west, you could go to Moose Lake. That would take you through Iron River area to Brule River, to Duluth and Superior, Fond du Lac and beyond, St. Louis River area. Or if you wanted to go south, you can take this road going down to Loon Lake, Pike Lake Chain area. It would take you across the Great Divide towards the town of Gordon, to St. Croix Falls, and you get from St. Croix River down to the Mississippi River and across the watershed that way. So there's all kinds of different places to go. I've taken the foot trails from the major hubs that were here in the Washburn area. Sorry, I say here, but I mean over there in Washburn, not here in Bayfield. So why would I want to focus on the history of Washburn tonight? Well, the Washburn history is pretty much written by the descendants of the loggers and the railroad men that were there. The railroad showed up in 1883. There were already people living here. There was already a community here. But the railroad decided we're going to rename this Washburn after a politician. And there were no ifs or buts about it. And we've always called it Washburn ever since then. And 9 years after Washburn was founded in 1883, the Ashland Trust did I hate to say like a decennial, but it was like a 9-year anniversary of Washburn. And there's a quote in the paper that says, "There are no romances of Indian lore in the history of its foundation. No poetical inspiration can be derived from its early history. When Washburn was platted, it was strictly a business consideration, and it has been a matter of business ever since." Well, I don't mean to throw anybody under the bus or talk bad about any Washburn historians, but I'm not trying to say this is a bad way to look at history, but it's a whitewashed way of looking at history. To say that there's no past history that matters now that the railroad is here. So the quote from 1892 got repeated 90 years later when the centennial happened in 1983. The Washburn Historical Society got together and wrote literature to celebrate 100 years of Washburn being here, and they repeated this very same quote in the literature that they published. And a few years later, they put the same quote on the lakeshore signage. So if you go down to the parking lot at the trailhead of Washington Avenue, where the lakeshore trail is, there's a big wooden sign. You can see this quote on that sign. And it's still on cityofwashburn.com website. If you look up the history page of City of Washburn, first they have to talk about the brownstone industry, how great this was for the history of Washburn. And oh yeah, by the way, there's no Indian law here, there's no past history that we have to be concerned about. So that really annoys me that this is the narrative that we've had for the last 140 years, more or less. So I'm just trying to raise awareness that there's an older story, that there's other people that came here before the railroad and that still are here. And I'll get into that a little bit later. This is a map that was created by the Trigg Land Office. Back in the 1960s, the Trigg Land Office in Minnesota was hired by tribes to calculate the value of ceded territory and natural resources at the time of the treaty. They were doing claims at the time, and so the Trigg Land Office took the original General Land Office records from the 1850s, and they created compiled maps of those land records to show the year the land was surveyed, who was there, what kind of roads or houses or improvements were already there at the time of the treaties. And you can see there's actually multiple clusters in the greater Washburn area, including at Washburn itself. It's also showing that the Great Trail that I was talking about earlier and some of the branches that would come off of it. Like when I was talking about Talking Fish, it starts down here and it goes along the lakeshore over to the council grounds here. So to say that there was nobody here before 1883 is pretty silly, because they were here before the 1854 treaty, possibly before the 1842 treaty, when the land was first ceded by the tribe to the United States. So there's a very rich history here that goes back decades before Washburn was even a thought. And besides that, if you look deep enough in the National Archives, in the General Land Office records and the Office of Indian Affairs records, you can find different maps that seem to be prototypes of the reservations that they were described in the 1854 treaty. And the second article of the treaty talks about making reservations as permanent homelands for the tribes. And the second clause of the second article talk specifically about the LaPointe ban. And the language is a little vague, it's a little hard to read, but one interpretation of the language is talking about crossing the lake shores of Swamigan Point and then back to the point of beginning. That seems to be trying to reinvent what should be Swamigan Point as being part of the reservation. They seem to be trying to push it over to across the point, from Swamigan Point to the Point of Rocks, which is marked here at the Point of Rocks Reservation. I don't know if it's supposed to be, if it morphed into this little offshoot, which is now attached to the reservation just outside of Ashland. But this Point of Rocks Reservation language seems to be talking about going across the lake shore to crossing Lake Swamigan Point back to the point of beginning, which would be at Jackson Harbor, or what should have been Jackson Harbor. That's a different story for a different day. So this is not just a one-off map that shows, hey, we'll call this place Point of Rocks as a fantastical reservation that's never going to exist. There's actually more of a history behind that name and why there would be a reservation here. If you look at other parts of the National Archives, in the Office of Indian Affairs and General Land Office, you can find different treaty allotments. There's actually 10 different treaty allotments under the seventh clause of the second article. We're talking about creating allotments within the reservation that we would divvy out 80 acres per family to be their family homestead within the permanent homeland of the reservation as a whole. There's 10 different families that decided to put their allotments in and around Washburn. Each allotment 80 acres. And if you look closely, there's actually 160 acres within the city of Washburn itself that were treaty trust lands. One of my favorite things to do is talk to my friends in Washburn. I'm like, I bet you're squatting on Indian land. And some of them are, and some of them aren't. And it's always a shock. It's always a fun conversation to have. Like, what does this mean to us today? Yeah, I don't want to get too much into that interpretation, but it's fun to think about. It's important to think about, to recognize this history and who is here before us. And we'll talk a lot more about the Peter B. Van Venture guy later on. You might have heard me mention him at least once already. And if you're thinking that's kind of a Dutch-sounding name, I'm thinking this is the guy that started the New Holland town site that I pointed out earlier. That was at the Salmo site. So yeah. And the people that created the General Land Office records have an interesting story themselves. I'm going to talk a little bit about this fellow named Augustus Hamilton Barber, who came from Vermont, started surveying when the western Lake Superior area with the Stunt brothers, when this land first came up, was purchased by the United States government as part of the 1842 ceded territory. And then as they started surveying the land, it would open up the land for public sale to Americans to buy. So he did a lot of work around Superior, Amacon, Iron River, and all around Robin Bay, the Bad River Reservation, Montreal River, Foster Island. And in April of 1856, he's writing letters home about the conspiracy among other land speculators. And it's starting to get a little violent around here, with people carrying knives and guns and threatening each other. He's referring to butcher knife companies must not meddle with any claim that when I have made one. And this is written a few days before he was found dead under mysterious circumstances. The official story is that he drowned in the Montreal River near his Ironton town site, but other records show that he was actually found battered, dead, in the woods up in the Pinocchio Mountains where he was working for the mining company. So there's a connection between his Ironton town site at Saxon Harbor and the proposed mine site that was up in the Pinocchios. So it's really tragic that he died under those circumstances. History would be a little bit different today if it wasn't for him passing away. His younger brother, Joe Allen Barber, was able to carry on some of the work. He had to deal with his brother's mysterious death. He take care of the family business, take care of the investment that they had, and he started succeeding a little bit better despite the tragedy. Later that year, he was awarded the government contract to survey the Bad River Reservation, the original founders of the Bad River Reservation. And he was also elected the surveyor for the LaPointe County. And then he was hired by private individuals as well to create town site maps and help people find out where the resources are, where the Iron Mountains are, where the trails are. People in this position had the ability to help other people become millionaires by showing them, this is the open frontier. We're just now opening the land up for public sales. So you might want to put your land over here rather than up there because there's better access to resources. So these surveyors were very powerful for that time. But despite the successes that he's having with getting the government contracts and getting elected and the private contracts as well, he's also writing that he would not like to have this known because not everything's on the up and up. He has to be careful about who knows what he's doing and where. When his brother Augustus passed away, their father was actually on the way from Vermont going over to Lake Superior to help him with the family business. And he didn't know that Augustus had died until he reached LaPointe and had to help his other son, Joe Allen, deal with the tragedy and take care of the family affairs, take care of the family businesses and investments. And he stays in touch with his son by writing. Once he leaves the area, he goes back to Vermont. He's writing constantly to his son, saying, hey, tell me what's going on. Tell me what's going on with the local affairs. How is this person doing? How is that person doing? Tell me what the investments are like. I have these articles from the national papers saying, hey, this is the new legislation that's going to be happening for paper towns. You should really prepare yourself and get ahead of the game by doing these things. He's giving his son constant advice. It's a very interesting family dynamic to read about throughout the Barber family letters. I'm just going to barely touch on them tonight. There's way too many to even get to. It's a different story for another day, but I'll touch upon some of the letters because it really helps to tell the story. And not only did his son Augustus die that year, 1856, but later that same year, after Giles leaves the area, their business partner, Albert McEwen, sadly passes away as well under mysterious circumstances. Another murder. He was on his way from Ironton town site at Saxon Harbor, taking the Great Trail down to St. Croix River Falls area, and he gets intercepted along the way. He gets murdered and robbed, and a lot of the town site papers, a lot of the money that he had to help bring their investment to the next level, got robbed, got taken away, and what they were planning to do with Ironton and other town sites in the area, it just went away, just like that, because the papers were lost and there was no backup copies of them. So it's really interesting to read the family coping with all this and trying to figure out what the next steps are. And even if Augustus had not been murdered, even if their friend McEwen had not been murdered, the town site would probably still have failed because of something called the 1857 national financial panic of 1857, where all these different paper towns and paper railroads, and especially paper banks, were failing on a national level. Because there was too much speculation going on. It finally caught up, and a lot of economies struggled in the United States after that, leading up to and even after the American Civil War of the 1860s. This was kind of like the precursor, one of the stepping stones leading up to the Civil War. And it especially affected the North much more than it did the South, and especially on the Great Lakes when they were trying to open this area up for industries and paper towns and all kinds of people to come in. So even if it wasn't for the violence and the murders that had happened, we might still not have the paper towns that they were trying to promote back in the day. So that's kind of an introduction to the paper towns and what we're going to be talking about tonight. So from here on out, we're going to do the circle tour of the greater Washburn area, starting at Sioux River. Then we're going to go down the lakeshore in a clockwise fashion to Houghton Point, down to Vandeventer Bay, all the way down to Boyd Creek, and then back up through the Barrens. That's kind of the greater Washburn area. So to give you an idea of what to expect for a walking tour tonight. So as I talk about Sioux River, people may see in a lot of documentation, a lot of literature about Sioux River, there's also, people like to say, oh, by the way, it's also known as Raspberry River. And it just always seemed weird to me because we already have a Raspberry River up in Red Cliff. So I'm trying to figure out where did this combination of names come from. And the earliest reference that I can find to it seems to be this 1821 sketch by Henry Schoolcraft, who was on the 1820 expedition of Henry Cass, going along Lake Superior. And then I think they took the Brule down to the Mississippi River. They were looking for the headwaters of the Mississippi River at the time. And in his journal, he talks about coming from Montreal River, going along Bad River, then going up Long Island to La Pointe, staying a night at La Pointe, then continuing on north past Raspberry River to Sand River, and then past Cornucopia and beyond. He does not go south from La Pointe. He's not going past Houghton Point to Sioux River. I'm sorry, he's not going to Sioux River at all. And this map that he draws is basically a cartoon. It's not supposed to be taken literally or geographically. It's just kind of a sketch of where things might be. A few years later, Henry Bayfield was working for the British Navy. He does a very accurate survey of the lakeshore of Lake Superior, including the Bayfield Peninsula. So he does draw a river at what should be Raspberry River, and he also draws a river at what should be Sioux River. But another map maker who's trying to combine the two with the names and the lakeshore, probably got them confused. You probably put Raspberry River where Sioux River is supposed to be. And that's how Raspberry River continues on at what should be Sioux River. So if anybody's wondering why people sometimes call Sioux River Raspberry River, that's why. It's just a mistake that people have passed on throughout the generations. What we sometimes call Raspberry, but really is Sioux River, is marked on this map as Bayfield. You can see this paper railroad that kind of goes out of the Barrens down to the lakeshore at what is Bayfield, but it's really Sioux River. When Bayfield was being formed in 1856, they had like a contract to bring the St. Croix River Railroad up to the area through the Barrens, and there was this competition between the different paper towns. Like, well, if Bayfield gets the railroad, we won't have much power or much resources because of that. So they're trying to get the railroad to stop before Bayfield, so they would have the power at the paper town where everybody's going. So what Bayfield is really Sioux River here. Bayfield is still on Sioux River down here, but now you can see there's an upper Bayfield where Bayfield's supposed to be. And then they start correcting that by putting Bayfield where upper Bayfield was, and then the lower Bayfield becomes lower Bayfield on this map. It's just a funny game, cat and mouse game that the paper towns were playing at the time, trying to compete with each other for the benefit of getting the railroad to come to them instead of Bayfield. And ultimately, this Barren railroad doesn't exist. The railroad actually comes along the lakeshore instead of down from the Barrens. But you can see other paper towns on this railroad map as well, like Ironton, where Stackton Harbor, there's Butterfield, where Washburn is, there's Butterfield again. By Ashland, there's also Bay City. It's just fascinating to look at all these paper towns and paper railroads back in the day. So eventually we stopped calling Sioux River Lower Bayfield, and we started calling it McElroy instead. Some people might be familiar with Francis McElroy from Bayfield history. He's part of the lecture series that would happen back in the day when they had a public speaking forum. He files what appears to be the first deed for land in the Bayfield area. He put the land claim at the confluence of the Sioux River with the Little Sioux River, because there's a little meadow there. The American Fur Company apparently had some kind of farm there back in the day. And there's great potential for a mill site because of the sandstone formation jamming up the water. So it'd be easy to build a sawmill there if you needed to. It was an existing farm at the time. And this deed mentioned the Sioux River, and it appears, as far as I know, this is the earliest written record of the name Sioux River. I have not found an older one than this yet. So Francis McElroy, he starts the farm, and eventually becomes a resort, popular place where people come to visit, and on the way to Bayfield, whether you're coming from the Barrens up to Francis McElroy on the Sioux River, or if you're coming up from Washburn, you go up to Bayfield that way. So a lot of people back in the day going to Bayfield for the first time would have stopped at this place. The Barber brothers were also there. They did the original land survey in 1855 of Sioux River, of the beach, of the surrounding township. And they say that it's well situated on the lake. This is going to be a great place for people to come to. It already was for a long, long time before that, but they recognized the economic value of it. They talk about the economic benefits of the area, the ecology, that there's lots of good fishing in the area. They know this is going to be a popular place. And even after Augustus passes away, his younger brother, Joe Allen Barber, continued to work with or for McElroy, doing survey work for him around the farm. And he's writing letters back home to Vermont talking about, first he stopped at the town of Houghton, had breakfast with the Maddox family, and then hops over to Sioux River, do some survey work for McElroy, and going back to Houghton and talking about the new sawmill that's being built by Houghton. So McElroy continued to do business with people in the area, make the name for himself, has a prominent location, and it's a very popular place for a long, long time. And here's the original 1855 survey map of Sioux River mouth, Friendly Valley Beach. You can see there's actually a road. It's literally called a road on the 1855 map. So at the time of the treaty, this is not an unpopulated place. There's a heavily trafficked area. And it's 1858 land patent where the American Fur Company meadow was. And you can see that still, even by 1938, it's still a prominent meadow. It's still a prominent farming area. McElroy eventually gets another land patent about 7 years later, a little further up the hill. It's another meadow, but when he's talking about the American Fur Company meadow, he's talking about the original one down here where the Sioux River and the Little River meet together at a good dam site. And this landscape really has not changed much since the 1938, and it probably didn't change much since the 1850s either. There might be a little bit more of a clearing in these areas, but it's been a meadow area, been a heavily trafficked road for a long, long time. A very popular place, and maybe that's why they call it Friendly Valley. It's just because people love to go there. Francis McElroy is pretty much one of the pioneers of Bayfield tourism, because as people are coming from Superior, from the lower parts of the state, coming in from the inland rather than by sea, they're almost certainly going to go through McElroy's farm. So when people are traveling to get to a tourism destination, they're going to go through McElroy. And even after McElroy stopped living there, after he sells it to other people, people still call it McElroy for a long time. They also call it Silvernail in some records, but it's mostly McElroy. And it's a very popular place to stop in the wintertime, very pleasant place to be in the summertime, good fishing, a happy place to be. So that's kind of a summary of Sioux River, and we're going to go down the lakeshore down to Houghton, which I was just talking about a little bit. On older maps, anything before 1850, you're not going to see the name Houghton on those maps. It appears to be named after the geologist, I'm blanking on his first name, Douglas Houghton. He was the state geologist from Michigan during the 1840s when he passed away during a shipwreck during a storm on Lake Superior. And it appears that Houghton Point was named in his honor by the town site of Houghton and their investors. But I don't know of any record that shows that Houghton was actually at Houghton Point. It's possible he may have written about it in a journal. I just haven't found that yet. I don't know if he had a personal connection to Houghton Point, but before it was Houghton Point, it was called Cold Point for decades, starting from the 1820s, and the name carried on through various maps and various map makers all the way through the 1850s until it got renamed. Another name that is probably a little bit more familiar would be Big Rocky Point, or Point of Rocks. You just saw that map I had earlier, Point of Rocks Reservation. I'll start talking a little bit more of that name here. The first map I've seen that has the reference to Big Rocky Point would be this 1830 sketch of the St. Croix and Wisconsin River watershed that was created by Joseph Nicolet. He was a French geographer that came to the area and was making hydrology maps for the United States government to figure out where these rivers are and where the trails too that go in between the rivers. And it appears that he was working with George Johnson when he made these maps in the 1830s. George Johnson was a Sault Ste. Marie mixed blood that moved over to Wisconsin to be the first Indian agent at La Pointe during the 1820s. So he was familiar with the area. He knew the language. He knew the place names. He knew the stories behind how to get from point A to point B. So between these two gentlemen, they created this very great map of the St. Croix and Wisconsin rivers, not only of the rivers themselves, but also the various trails that you could take from, say, to Fish Creek going down to St. Croix River country. And on this map, they actually call it roads because of how wide they are, because of how major these trail networks are. It's not just a little footpath, it's literally a road, just from people walking on it. And the way you pronounce that name would be Nyaji Bakan, or Big Rocky Point. So it's not just someone looking at that rock and saying that looks rocky. It's actually a traditional place name behind that. For example, there's a court case that happened in LaPointe County Court where this gentleman from Madeline Island, LaPointe, named Jerry Sullivan, he went down to the Bay Area, most likely some friends that lived at what's now Washburn, got intoxicated and was supposed to get a ride across the ice back up to LaPointe. But now people get, when they drink, they don't always do what's best for them. And he decides, no, I'm not going to take that horse ride. I'm just going to walk back to LaPointe. And unfortunately, he died. He froze to death. Getting back, when he leaves the bay, going back to LaPointe, he freezes to death. And during the court case, during the deposition about that, there's a Chippewa man named Skinaway is giving sworn testimony in the court case, and he's talking about how he's leaving the bay, and he's by Stony Point, he looks behind him, and he sees the gentleman. He's probably the last person to see him alive before he froze to death on the ice. But he's talking about a specific place, being leaving the bay, his Stony Point here, and Madeline Island over here. That's how we know where Stony Point is. Not only because of the similar name, but also because he's talking about leaving the bay. So sworn testimony by this Ojibwe man, making specific references to a specific place name in this testimony. And then also, we see the name Stony Point in other references by other cultures as well. For example, in Chris Lafame, he is a very prominent man in early Washburn history. I believe he was either in Madison or Milwaukee. He was a scientist, he was an author, historian, and he came up to LaPointe to be able to check on his mining investments in the Pinocchio Mountains and to check out the rock formation to make sure that, yes, this is what we should be investing in. And he talks about going from LaPointe over past Stony Point, where there's a paper town called Houghton, one house and one steam mill. And honestly, that's if your paper town had one house and one steam mill, you were doing pretty good. There's a lot of paper towns that had a lot less than that and were still getting money for investments and whatnot. So this prominent man in Wisconsin history is also using the name Stony Point to refer to Houghton Point. So circling back to that map, yes, the Point of Rocks is not just a random name that was given out on one map. There's a long history behind this place name and how it was used and who used it and what it meant to people. So not only do we have all these records from the 1830s, 40s, 50s, talking about the Point of Rocks or Stony Point or Big Rocky Point, but the name gets carried on in later generations and decades as well. For example, the quote, Houghton Point, Wisconsin, using the name Nyaji Bakan, again, the rocky point of land projecting out into the lake. This was published by the Catholic Historical Society of St. Paul in one of their books in 1915, and it's also republished by the Wisconsin Historical Society website today. So it's a very strong connection of this name, Big Rocky Point, to what we call Houghton Point today. So let's take a closer look at what would be the town plan for Houghton. A lot of people, when they think of Houghton Point, they're thinking of this little place right down here where that cute little canyon is, where the mouth of the creek comes out to the lake. You can have a little picnic on the cliffside right there, or look out in the water. You can see Long Island, you can see La Pointe. It's a very impressive place to be. But the town was more than just this little canyon or Echo Dell or Houghton Falls. It's about at least a mile wide, about a mile long. It's got tons of streets and avenues and piers, and it's going to be a hopping place someday. Well, it never really became a town, but it did pay off in the long run, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But the three main people that were behind the town site were Asa W. Maddox, and he actually lived in the town of La Pointe. Town of Houghton. He's that one house and one sawmill that we were talking about earlier. They had a business partner named Charles Tucker, who was like a real estate attorney. He lived over in Washington, D.C., so he was promoting the town of Houghton on a nationwide level, getting all kinds of big power players from D.C. to pay attention to this area and put their money up here. There's also this guy, Frederick Prentice from Toledo, Ohio, who is also the third major business partner behind this town site. And Frederick Prentice, a lot of people might be familiar with him based on his role here in Bayfield history, also Ashland history and Washburn history. He was the king of brownstone of the Apostle Islands. He's got a long legacy up here in these woods. So if you recognize that name, you probably already know who he is. You might recognize him from Prentice Park in Ashland, or Prentice Avenue in Ashland, things like that. And so the Barber family spends quite a bit of time in and around Houghton as they're getting from point A to point B, from Ashland to La Pointe, or over to Ironton, or into the hills to do the survey work. And they write back and forth a lot. In fact, Gal Barber, the father, he even lives with Frederick Prentice for a while in Toledo, apparently. So as he's living with Frederick Prentice, he's writing back to Wisconsin to his son and saying, hey, give me some gossip. Tell me how the town plan is doing. Is it really as good as Frederick Prentice says it is, or is it struggling a little bit? He doesn't trust his housemate. He's got to get the good word from his son. He's making all these references to wildcat towns and stock sales, and it's just fascinating to read if you're into that kind of history. It's a little catty sometimes, but it's just a family dynamic that they have. So more gossiping going on between the family letters. There's work still going on at the town of Houghton. Mind you, this is at the peak of the 1857 financial panic. We're talking about the general crash and business failings at Stony Point, City of Houghton. I received a letter from Prentice last week, talking about more investors and settlers coming down from Toledo, Ohio, down to up to Bayfield area, Washburn area, town of Houghton. And you might recognize that he's not the only person to come from the Toledo, Ohio area. The Pike family of Bayfield also came up from Toledo, Ohio. So there was the Whittlesey family also came up from Ohio, the Western Reserve. So there was a big movement of people and investors coming up from Ohio to Swamigan Bay. And yet more gossiping going on between the father and the son. The son's writing back to his father in Vermont now and saying, in case you forgot, here's a pamphlet all about Houghton, Houghton, Houghton. Do you recognize this name? And it's just really funny to me anyway. It's just reading how the family's reacting to this. They're probably jealous of how much attention Houghton is getting when they'd rather have these investors going to their own town site down at Saxon Harbor, especially after all the setbacks that they had with the murders. And 1858 comes around and things are really looking bad now. People run out of money. People were promised payments, and again, working really hard on up in the mining paper towns, and they're not receiving anything for it. And they eventually, a lot of people have to leave the area and start finding work elsewhere. One person would be Colonel Cutler, he was this mercenary that was hired by the mining companies. After Augustus had been murdered, they hired this Colonel Cutler from Maine to come out here and do a little bit enforcement, make sure things don't get out of hand. So he was known for his violence, for his intimidation of the area, especially for how he treated the tribal population. It earned him the nickname Gray Devil. And that nickname Gray Devil followed him all the way through the Civil War. He became a major general that was involved with the Battle of the Gettysburg and other major conflicts. So he became eventually a major general of the American Civil War. People think that his nickname Gray Devil came from the Civil War. It actually came from here because of how he treated the native population. So yes, as Joel Allen is writing to his family about people failing, people leaving, people are running out of money, times are getting worse all the time, and by next winter it can be dreaded. He's also sending his family little maps and whatnot on his letters showing the kind of work that he's doing. So he's actually really showing the progress they've made of surveying the Bad River Reservation on behalf of the government. He's also marking out different town sites that he's keeping track of. So Ironton here at the Saxon Harbor. There's Ordana, number 2 in the middle here. There's number 3, Ashland. 4 is Houghton, and then 5 is Bayfield, and then 6 is LaPointe. He's sending good intel, sending good information back home. So it's just really fascinating dynamic to read about. So Giles A. Barber, he's the father of the 2 surveyors. One gets murdered, one survives. He's sending good intelligence back to Wisconsin all the time, saying, put your money here, don't invest in that, tell me what these people are doing, I don't care about these other people, tell them I said hello, don't tell them I said hello. And he gets elected to the House of Representatives in Vermont. So he's got a lot of political connections on the East Coast as well as here. And he's friends with other politicians that work on the federal level and is able to influence them as far as paper town politics and paper town legislation gets changed. So he's always sending his son good intelligence about what to expect. I don't know if you call that insider trading, but something similar to that. But ultimately, he failed. His family leaves the area, the investments don't work out, and they don't really seem to come back after the 1850s. But the other guy that they love to gossip about, Frederick Prentice, he succeeds. He keeps his land investment in the area, and it pays off in the long run. So his paper town of Houghton never really becomes a town. There's a few houses there, but never really becomes a town. Instead, he turns it into a brownstone quarry, and it makes a lot of money during the brownstone industry. Not only at town of Houghton, but up in the Apostle Islands, Hermit Island as well. He invests in a lot of different things in the Lake Superior area, including the Equidong village, just west of Ashland. We now call that Prentice Park, but it was an addition to the original Ashland. I struggle on how to say this, but for lack of a better word, he was an investor in the Chief Buffalo Square Mile that was supposed to be located at the city of Duluth, Canal Park area. He was the founder of the Prentice Brownstone Quarry Company, and a lot of people might know about the cedar bark lodge that he had on Hermit Island and the legend that goes with that house and why he didn't keep it ultimately. So the town of Houghton is now becoming North Washburn on this map. So he keeps his investment, he pays off in the long run, and he makes a lot of money in this area because of it, and continues to come back here decade after decade. So he succeeds, and his competitors, the Barber family, does not. So before we leave the Houghton area, I just want to circle back to that sawmill that I was talking about before, where Joe Allen Barber writes about the new sawmill that's happening at Houghton in the 1850s. By the 1870s, this town site called McClellan shows up where that sawmill is, just south of Houghton, not quite as far as Bayfield. It's the ravine just north of Memorial Park, if you know that area, between Memorial Park and Houghton Point. And it appears to be promoted by Sam Stewart Vaughn, but I just have to do a little bit more research into his story with that town site. I haven't quite found the record for that yet. But now we're leaving Houghton. We're going to go a little bit further down to what we would call Washburn today, or Vanaventa Bay. And as we leave Houghton, we're going to come across this guy living at what is now Memorial Park on the east end of Washburn. And his name is Antoine Gordon. He's a prominent, very powerful mixed blood man who is also married to a mixed blood lady named Sarah Dingley. She was a mixed blood from the Sault Ste. Marie area. Antoine Gordon is actually a mixed blood from Sandy Lake in Minnesota, and they met up in La Pointe, started a family, and by the time 1855 comes around, Antoine Gordon actually had a farm at what is Memorial Park today. Ultimately, he decided to leave the Washburn area and go start the town of Gordon, which is on the St. Croix River, about 2/3 of the way down to St. Croix Falls. But you're literally just following the trail that goes from Bayfield through Vanaventa Bay all the way down to Gordon and beyond. So I've actually been to his original house in the town of Gordon. It's still owned by the Gordon family, his direct descendants. I literally went inside this house right here, which is the old Gordon store, and sat down, had cookies and coffee with the family, and it was just a really fun day. Good way to spend a rainy day. But this house in Gordon probably looked a lot like his original house at Memorial Park. So it's a very prominent man in local history and regional history as well. If you were going through the area, you probably would have stopped at his house and said hello. As we walk down the shoreline a little further to central Washburn, where the coal dock is, where Memorial Street cul-de-sac parking lot is, where the lakefront trail starts, middle of the lakeshore trail. This is where Captain Stephen Butterfield would have had his house and his dock, and where the old ferry dock was in Washburn is where the old Butterfield dock was. And he was basically the first charter boat captain for hire in the area. So someone in Bayfield or La Pointe needed to get their mining equipment from the dock there down to Ashland so they could haul it up into the woods. They probably would have hired Butterfield. In fact, a lot of people did. He married into the tribe. He married Mary Mello from La Pointe. And so the Mello family was pretty prominent, mixed blood family at La Pointe at the time. So he married into the tribe. He had a nice farm docked at what we call Washburn today. And you can see that his name is actually featured on many maps throughout before Washburn shows up. First map, 1855, Butterfield Farm is down here. 1860s, the name keeps on, even through the Civil War, after the Civil War, through the 1870s, it's still Butterfield. If I had more room on this slide, I would have shown you an 1881 map of Butterfield as well. So that name was there for a long, long time. It's just, I don't know why they decided to name it Washburn after the railroad was built. I think they were just trying to get rid of the Indian lore and just manifest destiny, path forward. We don't have to think about who was here before. That's just a sad way of thinking about history, in my opinion. So if you really want to research the history of Butterfield, not only do you have to go through the La Pointe County Register of Deeds office, which is actually in Bayfield County at Washburn, you also have to look at the Ashland County Book of Deeds as well, because during the 1860s, Washburn area was actually part of Ashland County. So it's Benoit, the whole first part of Bayfield County was part of Ashland County for about 5-6 years before it got moved back to what we call Bayfield County today. So if you want to read the true history of the Butterfield, all the original town records, you have to look in a couple different places to put that story together. And it's not easy to do because Ashland they don't index records outside of Ashland County, even though it was part of Ashland County originally. So you just have to go through the book page by page to find what you're looking for. So if anybody wants to do that research, I'll let you do it. And that way I can just sit back and enjoy your talk someday. So yeah, it was Butterfield for many decades before Washburn was reinvented. To walk down the lake shore a little bit further, you get to what we call West End Park today, where Vandeventer Creek would have come out and what we now still call Vandeventer Bay. We find this gentleman who I was talking about a couple times earlier, Peter B. Vandeventer, who married Caroline Morrow. So Caroline Morrow and Mary Morrow were sisters, so that makes Vandeventer and Butterfield brothers-in-laws. And as the family empire, they basically controlled what we call Washburn. And they say that he was in the grocery business, but that's a nice way of saying that he would deal alcohol sometimes. And he would show up at the temperance meetings and try to intimidate people, saying, "Why do you care about what I'm doing with my time or what my business is about? Just go mind your own business." He eventually leaves the area under mysterious circumstances. I think maybe he just bit off more than he could chew or something along those lines. But because he leaves the area, he leaves his wife behind, and that results in the first divorce case of LaPointe County. So it's just an interesting man, interesting name, interesting life story. And thank goodness we still have something named after him today, just to keep this legacy alive. This is James Smith Buck. He is a Milwaukee pioneer and historian. And when he was in the early days of Milwaukee, he got hired by the mining companies to come up here and work for the paper town to maybe create a house for the paper town or help walk the trail a little bit more to keep the vegetation down or to help Cutler intimidate people or things along those lines. But he, in his memoirs that he published in the 1870s, several years before Washburn comes around, he's writing a story about how he's in a bad storm, leaving LaPointe. Captain Butterfield is sailing the boat. They're barely staying afloat because they have all this heavy mining equipment for the mining companies that they're trying to bring down to Ashland. So they barely make it from LaPointe down to Gordon's house. They stop for dinner at Antoine Gordon's house, and they walk down the shoreline past Butterfield's house to Peter Vandeventer's old place before crossing the bay to Ashland. So in this little memoir here, this tiny little paragraph here, he's actually describing everybody I just talked about. He's talking about Antoine Gordon, he's talking about Captain Stephen Butterfield, he's talking about Peter V. Vandeventer, and he's describing this living, breathing community of people at Washburn several years before Washburn is invented. So it's just fascinating that he was able to capture the community in a small paragraph like this, just to demonstrate it wasn't just individual people living here at individual times. It was a community. It was a mixed blood community that was living at Washburn. So we're going to go down the lake shore a little bit further. We're going to skip over Bono Creek. I don't have anything against Bono Creek. It's just not part of my story tonight. So maybe that'll be a talk for a different day. But we're going to go down to Boyd Creek instead. Boyd Creek is along the Talking Trail, the Talking Fish River Trail that I was talking about before, where you could take Talking Fish River to what would be Vandeventer Bay, or maybe on this map you might take Talking Fish River to Fish Creek instead. They're both referring to Fish Creek and the Talking Trail between Vandeventer Creek and Fish Creek. And Boyd Creek is more or less in the middle of that. So it's also part of the Talking Trail system. And it's also part of an area that we now call Ondostigan today, or Buckdale. And Ondostigan, it's hard for me to define because I'm not an Ojibwe person. That's not my language. But it's more or less referring to the other side of the bay, or you get from point A to point B by the way of the bay. It's referring to a specific part of the bay, but as a traveling destination, not as a singular place, but like a journey that you would take. So people have been passing through the Fish Creek area for a long, long time, and continue to do that. So that's what that name is kind of referring to, Ondostigan. So here we are, Boy Creek. You can see a couple trails that would go right there, and through the mouth of Boy Creek. You can see Augustus Barber, when he did his survey in 1855, he draws a cute little house there right up the creek. You got the fields and maybe another field down there. And it's a prominent place on the lakeshore. Robert Du Bois, he actually came to Swamping Bay during the 1840s. We know this because he got married during the 1840s and he had children born in the 1840s. He comes to the area. He was born in Washington, D.C. as a nephew of President John Quincy Adams, and then his father was the Indian agent at Mackinac Island as he was growing up. And he gets into some kind of trouble. He has to leave that area, go hide for a while. So that's how he ends up in Swamping Bay during the 1840s, where he marries a girl of the Cadoc family at La Point, Julia Cadoc. And they have several children, and they end up in a couple different places. They own what used to be the Cadoc Fort on Grant Point of Madeline Island now. They had Boyd Creek here at the property, at the town site eventually, and I think they have some investments in Ashland as well, but he's mostly known for Boyd Creek today. And it's just a prominent stopping place along the Talking Trail. So the farm that he has here, all those acres right there, eventually becomes a town called Paper Town of Mesnard or Menard. And that's named after Father Mesnard during the 1600s. And Mesnard's journal talk about the St. Croix Indian Trail, the main trail leading to Boyd Creek. It didn't really go to Washburn at the time. It was going to Boyd Creek instead, because that's where the old Indian village was. Sometimes it's called Shores Landing in the Washburn record. A lot of people are trying to find this place called Shores Landing, where the old Indian village was. And they figure you probably can't find it anymore because it washed away. That part of the shoreline is now underwater. It's just because of the erosion that happened over time. So there's this legend about Father Mesnard going to the village of what's called Boyd Creek. It's not really a village there anymore because it washed away. No traces of the village are now visible. The only thing that was left behind was this major trail that would go there up to the water edge. So Robert Dundas Boyd, like I said, he made into the Cadoc family. He had different investments here and there. He was well connected nationwide because of his family. And he got elected to various positions in LaPointe County. He was the Registry of Deeds for a while, among many other things. And unfortunately, he had a little bit of a drinking problem and got in a fight with someone and got shot and killed. And his wife also passed away. I don't remember why, off the top of my head. But so all of his children got orphaned, and they kind of got spread out. Some people will go to Spider Lake along the Great Trail, Flambeau Farm, which is part of the Flambeau Trail Network, and then some other people will go to Lac Flambeau. So children got spread out. But we still have the Boyd family in the area today, and I'll get into that because where did the kids go? I'm talking about 4 major families that were here in the Washburn area. We had the Gordon family, we had the Butterfield family, we had the Vanderventer family, and the Boyd family. And well, the answer is they didn't go anywhere. they're still here today. I don't know if there's any descendants of any of these families here today. If you are, please feel free to share that with people. Make yourself known because this is your story. But they didn't leave. They didn't go anywhere. They didn't disappear. They're still a part of our community today. They're still prominent families. Hey, all right. All right. All right, thank you. They didn't just go away because the railroad came here. They've been here, and they continue to be prominent members of our families, of our communities. For example, Nicole Boyd is the chairwoman of Redcliffe. The previous chairperson was Chris Boyd. Nathan Gordon was the vice chairman. You might know the Butterfield and Vanderventer names from, say, the Bellinger settlement outside of Bayfield. This gentleman right here, Edward Gordon, he was the son of Antoine Gordon. He married Julia Boyd, who was a daughter of Robert Boyd. And they were kids when they were born in LaPointe. By the time they're about 10 years old, they're living at Washburn. Ed Boyd goes away during the Civil War, fights in the Civil War, comes back home, eventually finds Julia Boyd again, and they start a relationship, they start a family. Edward Boyd was a mailman between Bayfield and Hayward for many, many years. And they eventually moved down to the Hayward area when they raised a family. But after they raised a family, they moved to Bayfield and were part of the Bayfield community for about 2 decades or so. And they're now buried in I think it's the Greenwood Cemetery right outside of town. Major people in Bayfield history come from these families. So yes, you'll find Gordon, Butterfield, Vanderventers, and Boyds, and Washburn, Bayfield, Redcliffe, Bellinger Settlement, LaPointe, Ashland, Bad River, Gordon, and beyond. They're still a very big part of our communities today. Now that we've talked about these families, I'm going to go somewhere that's a little less populated, that may not have had anybody living there, actually. We're going to head up into the Barrens now, back to the paper railroad that I was talking about earlier, where you get from either to Ashland or from Sioux River to an intersection out in the Barrens. In these Barber letters, we're talking about Frederick Prentice selling property, and we call him West Houghton at the time. So it's not talking about Houghton here, but it's actually talking about West Houghton over there. The railroad company stock was $4,000, which is, holy cow, that's a lot of money back in the day. The railroad never really got built, but you can see that there was a major trail intersection right there, not only for the paper railroad, but also real walking trails that existed for a long, long time. So West Houghton actually was called the town of Aurora by the time they filed the paperwork for it. And it's mostly known for what we call the Northern Wisconsin Bank that was supposed to be in the town of Aurora. I don't know if they ever built an actual building for the bank, but they certainly printed money for the bank. And you can find this $10 bill or other currency that was printed and issued by the Northern Wisconsin Bank about the town of Aurora. And it got circulated. It was printed, unfortunately, right at the time of the crash. So it didn't last very long. However, you can still find the currency, the tangible currency, through eBay and other private collections today. I personally have not touched a $10 bill from the Northern Wisconsin Bank. I sure would love to see one someday, just to hold it in my hand and know the history behind it. Because a lot of people who own this thing probably don't know where Aurora is. They probably think it was somewhere else downstate or wherever. But it's just fascinating to me that they actually printed money for for a place out in the Barrens that's behind Mount Valhalla. It only lasted for a year or two. Who knows if they ever actually had an actual building But it's just fascinating to know how much money went behind this. Moose Lake was another part of early Bayfield tourism, because when you were on your way from Superior or wherever to get along the Superior Road to Bayfield, before you got to Bayfield, you'd have to stop at McElroy's, and before you got to McElroy's, you'd have to stop at Moose Lake. And that was a major trail intersection out in the Barrens, behind what is now Mount Valhalla. And there was actually a couple of people that were operating the resort there. I think they were both Nick Bloods. I'm a little uncertain about Bill Herbert. The record's a little unclear about that one, but George Washington Talbot certainly was. So it's another example of a mixed blood community that was along the Great Trails and along the different town sites in the greater Washburn area. Today, Moose Lake, it's just, you go out there, it's a hike to get there, and it's amazing to think that there ever was anything that was there. It's overgrown, it's a cute little lake out in the sand country. It's really hard to imagine which part was even where people were living or where there might have been a cabin. But if you ever get this opportunity to, it's worth a hike. It's about a mile or two off the beaten road to get there. And there's actually an ATV trail that goes by it. That might be a shortcut that you could take. So please do check out the Moose Lake sometime. Go camping and try to look for the bank. See if you can make a deposit. That's my talk for tonight. I just want to summarize the 5 different places that we went to. We went to Sioux River, we went to Houghton Point, we went to Vanderventer Bay, we went to Boyd Creek, we went up to the Barrens, and now we're did the full circle tour of the greater Washburn area. And you can literally see the trail network on that, the bird's eye view of the tour that we just did. And the 5 things I want you to walk away with tonight is the understanding of the ancient trail network that we've had here ever since the glaciers have melted away, of the various ancient village sites that were at the mouth of every creek along Thrommingen Bay, especially in the greater Washburn area. I want you to know about the Point of Rocks Reservation and the mixed blood allotments that were surrounding the Houghton Point area. And the various families that lived in Washburn and still do live in Washburn and the greater area. And some of the paper town politics as people are competing to hopefully make money. They were just living the American dream as best as they knew it back in the day. Today we might think some of those politics are questionable, manifest destiny and whatnot, but people are just doing the best that they knew how back in the day with what they could, especially with limited resources. So I just want to say thank you again, and I hope to see you down the trail sometime.